Welcome back to AfricaCom TV at the 20th anniversary of AfricaCom right here in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm joined now by Unathi from Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. Are you enjoying the AfricaCom this year?
I am. Certainly am. It's actually my first time, but it's huge, it's big, and it's quite interesting actually. And it's good to look at things from an African perspective.
Do you have any particular standout moments, some highlights?
Yeah, for me, it's just all the issues that touch on digital disruption. I'm just fascinated about what it can do. I mean, the conversation we're just having now of how technology has really changed our lives. You know, I think it's all fascinating in that way.
In fact, let's go straight into then your discussion. You are participating in a keynote address on developing a winning ICT strategy for your organization in the fourth industrial revolution. What is a winning ICT strategy?
The key elements that you definitely want to have, instead of saying, how do we develop an IT strategy, but what are those key elements that you definitely want to have? And I'll share with you just a few. A purpose. How, as you do that strategy, you need to really start with a grand purpose. And without this purpose, there is no ICT strategy. And there's other elements, things that I think are quite important. I talk about 4 arms of accountability. IT people tend to not always understand who their customers are. For an example, I could say I'm in Parliament and my customers are HR, or my customers is finance, but really my customers are the citizens of the country, because that's who Parliament lives for Parliament of the people. But so if you worked in a bank, your customers are the customers of the bank. Your customers are not necessarily your line of business. So it's just those little things that are not so little, you know, actually quite big. So, and there's also a demand side of IT and a supply side of IT, and there needs to be a very strict synergy between the two. So I shared 10 this morning, but those are just some of them.
And just to pick up a little bit more on the second one, because that is quite key. As a citizen of the Republic of South Africa, you're right. I'm your client. I need to be able to have access to Parliament digitally, and ultimately that's who you are serving. And that does shift the paradigm, doesn't it, as in implementing a strategy, coming up with one as far as ICT is concerned?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what I must be married to. I mean, all of us that walk in there, we exist to do that. And not that I'm here to speak about Parliament, but absolutely on the point. So the citizens of the country in this instance, so if you were working for BMW, it will be the people that buy a BMW that are your customers. And this, I can tell you, I can guess, 6 out of 10, I think IT divisions would get this wrong. They may even know it, but in behavior, it's not something that's always in their mind. And you need to get the entire team to buy into who's our customer, who are we trying to speak to. And yes, we worked with a number of partners. I'm talking externally and internally to get those services out to the customers. And today, with digital disruption being here, I mean, you talk about digital democracy, you talk about accessing things digitally. People want information now, and they want it at the palm of their hand. So that's why my cell phone is always with me.
In fact, the other panel discussion you're participating on was on digital disruption and entrepreneurship. What new opportunities are you seeing in this space?
A friend of mine is studying in startup tech in New York, and it's on education. It's on Ivy League education that normally you must pay a fortune for, but she's want to bring this to people to where they are. She wants to bring the professors of schools like Columbia, schools like Harvard, schools like Princeton, to people who otherwise would never have access and never be able to get into those schools. So every industry is affected by this. So these are entrepreneurship opportunities right in every industry. Education is one of those that stacks up for me. I mean, in South Africa, for instance, look what Uber has done. Good or bad, because of course there's risks as well with digital disruption. There's regulation issues with digital disruption. I think that's what we're dealing with in terms of Uber coming into South Africa. But it changes the landscape. You know, it's doing things in the ways that haven't been done before. It's when a new approach meets the right condition. And I think in an African context, we've got a lot of these social conditions that with a new approach, digital disruption has happened.
And therein lies the opportunity, isn't there? So we can use digital disruption to realize solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing, but more importantly, be driving and fueling the economy at the same time.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, entrepreneurship, certainly my days in high school was never a discipline there's a concept that it was never a discipline that you could go and do a BCom and major in entrepreneurship. So I think it's such a driver, and it's such an opportunity as well that digital disruption also presents, and with the creation of jobs. Because, I mean, who's to say the jobs that we have today, we're not going to have them in 15 years' time. That's why the jobs we have today are very different from the jobs that existed 20 years ago. So this is the space for entrepreneurship.
Let's bring it closer to home in South Africa. How have you seen digital disruption shaping the South African ICT sector?
I was saying to a colleague outside earlier that I want to be honest and say it's mostly talked about than it's really happening. Of course, I mean, back in the day, you and I have cell phones now. We have app on our phones. We've got ways we can contact each other that are fairly easy, okay? But there's a whole lot more about digital disruption. One of the issues that we have in South Africa is that of access. It may seem like it's easy to have an iPhone and have some Samsung phone and access A, B, and C, but what's the real penetration in a South African context? I mean, because people tend to think there's only two cities in Johannesburg, Cape Town, maybe Durban, but the wider South Africa exists outside of that, you know. So call it a skills gap, call it a gap that needs to be closed, and from an infrastructural point of view, these are really key elements for it to be really realized. You know, otherwise you only bring it to those that can afford it, to those that have access to it. So access is a big challenge for us.
Which I imagine would be the one thing you'd like to see realized in 20 years' time, because we are marking 20 years of AfricaCom. We'll be back here in 2037, and I'm hoping we won't be having a conversation about access.
I think we definitely won't be. It will be interesting. I wonder how we're all going to look like. Maybe you're going to be, you know, interviewing one of the robots. You've seen the robot that's been given a residence in Dubai. Maybe you'll be interviewing a robot. I think it will look very differently from what it looked now, you know, and everything is going to be following the revolution. It's, I say, impossible almost to even imagine what it's going to be in 20 years' time. But what I hope for, I hope South Africa finds a way to use digital disruption in the way that's going to benefit South Africans. I understand there's risks associated. I understand there's fear at times. People are worried, where's my data going and things like that. But I hope South Africa would have found ways that's really going to benefit people living in South Africa and hopefully solve a lot of our social ills through technology.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. I'm certainly hoping that we're going to realize some of what you envision for 20 years from now. Thank you very much, Unathi, from the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. You're listening to AfricaCom TV right here at the 20th anniversary of AfricaCom, where business happens.